Echoes of the forgotten song. A shepherd's silent promise. The bullet hit the fence post 2 inches from Caleb Horn's left ear before he even heard the shot. He dropped flat against the dry ground, his cheek pressed into the red dust of the Texas panhandle, heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his back's teeth. His horse, a gray mare named Dust, bolted sideways and pulled the reins clean from his hand. He did not chase her. He did not move at all. Another shot cracked through the afternoon air and kicked up dirt a foot from his boot. Someone on the ridge wanted him dead, and they were patient about it. Caleb Horn was 34 years old and had spent the last 11 years working sheep on the Larkin land, a stretch of golden grass range that ran from the broken limestone bluffs in the east all the way to the dry creek bed they called Widow's Run in the west. He was not a man who made enemies. He kept to himself. He woke before the sun and slept before it finished going down. He knew every rock and hollow of these 8,000 acres better than he knew his own reflection. He had not fired a gun in 4 years. He had one on his hip now, and he did not reach for it. Not yet. He pressed himself against the base of the fence post and scanned the ridge with his eyes alone. The ridge was a half-mile of broken sandstone and dry juniper, and whoever was up there had the high ground and the shade. Caleb had open ground and the afternoon sun in his face. He waited. The shots had stopped, which was worse than if they had continued. A man who keeps shooting is afraid. A man who stops is thinking. After 4 minutes, that felt considerably longer. Caleb heard the sound of a horse moving on gravel somewhere above and to the north. Then it faded. Then it was gone. He stayed flat for another 10 minutes. Then he got up slowly, collected Dust from where she had stopped 30 yards away, with her reins caught in a mesquite bush, and rode the long way back to the Larkin house without letting his back face the ridge. Martha Larkin was on the porch when he arrived, and she saw the expression on his face before he could arrange it into something calmer. "What happened?" she said. Martha Larkin was 61 years old, and she had the kind of face that had been weathered by every season for 4 straight decades, and had come out of it looking like someone had drawn strength into the lines instead of age. She ran the Larkin spread alone since her husband Vernon had gone into the ground 3 winters back. She ran it with 2 hands besides Caleb, a boy named Pete who was 19 and eager, and an old man named Doug who knew more about sheep than any living person, but could not move fast enough to be useful in a crisis. "Somebody shot at me from the ridge above the east fence line," Caleb said. Martha did not flinch. She had lived on this land too long to flinch at bad news. "Hit? No. Dust? No." She was quiet for a moment. A warm wind moved across the porch boards and sent a handful of dry leaves scraping along the railing. "How many shots?" "2 that I know of." She looked out at the eastern hills, which were going orange in the late light. "That would be Cole Drennan's men," she said. The way she said it was the way a person names a sickness they have been expecting. Cole Drennan owned the Anchor Ranch, which ran east and north of the Larkin land. He ran cattle, the way everyone in this county had once run cattle, and he had been patient for 3 years, while Vernon Larkin slowly shifted the property over to sheep. Patient the way a rock is patient before it rolls downhill. Vernon had died before the legal trouble started. Martha had inherited it the same week Drennan's lawyer rode into town and began filing paperwork that challenged the Larkin water rights on Widow's Run. The water rights were everything. Without the creek, and the sheep had no reliable source through the dry summer months, and the summers here were very dry. "He's moving faster than lawyers now," Caleb said. "Yes." Martha turned back to look at him. "Are you hurt?" "No, ma'am." "Good." She looked down at her hands for a moment. Then come inside. I have something to show you. He followed her through the front room, past the old iron stove and the photograph of Vernon in his younger years, and into the small room off the kitchen where Martha kept the ranch's papers. She went to the shelf above the desk and pulled down a flat tin box that Caleb had never seen before. She opened it and took out a folded piece of paper, old enough that the creases had gone soft and brown. Vernon's grandfather bought this land in 1871, she said. He bought it from a man named Isaac Farrell, who had worked it as a shepherd since 1858. She set the paper on the desk and smoothed it open with both hands. This is the original deed. And this, she pointed to a line near the bottom, written in faded ink, is a covenant written into the deed. Isaac Farrell's covenant. He sold the land on one condition. Caleb leaned in and read the faded words slowly. The covenant said that the land would always be kept as a shepherd's range, that no owner of the Larkin parcel could convert it to cattle grazing without the consent of the Farrell line. It said the land had been promised, in Farrell's own words, to be kept in the old way. Caleb straightened up. Does Drennan know about this? He does now, Martha said. His lawyer found it in the county records 2 weeks ago. And that's why the pace has changed. And the Farrell line? Martha looked at him steadily. There is one living heir, a woman named June Farrell. She lives in a town called Seco Springs, about 40 miles southwest of here. She paused. She's the only one who can give consent to change the land's use. If she signs, Drennan can pressure the court to dissolve the water rights and the covenant both. And if she doesn't sign, then he can't, and he knows it. Caleb looked at the paper again. Then he looked at Martha. Where does the shooting fit in? Martha folded the document and put it back in the tin. It fits in, she said quietly, because someone needs to ride to Seco Springs before Drennan's men get to June Farrell first. Outside, the wind was picking up. The sheep in the near pasture moved in a slow, uneasy cluster toward the fence. Caleb Horn picked up his hat from the desk. I'll leave it first light, he said. He was on the trail before the sky was fully light, riding south into a country that turned harder and drier as the miles went by. The grass thinned first, then it went sparse, and then it was red rock and creosote, and the occasional pale spike of sottle rising from the flats like something that had given up on being ordinary. Caleb rode with his eyes moving, not nervously, just the way a man rides when he knows someone may be following and does not want to look like he knows. He had told Pete to keep the flock close to the homestead, and told old Doug to load the spare rifle and sleep near the barn. Pete had nodded in a way that meant he understood the seriousness. Doug had said nothing and started oiling the rifle before Caleb finished the sentence. By mid-morning, the trail bent south along a dry arroyo, and Caleb came up over a low ridge to find a town below him that was not on any map he had. A dozen buildings, half of them abandoned, a water tank on a rusted tower, and a single road going through it like it wanted to leave. He rode down out of curiosity and passed through without stopping. An hour later, a man fell into pace beside him on a brown horse without introduction or explanation. Caleb looked at him sidelong. The man was perhaps 50, lean in the way that comes from working outside for 30 years without enough to eat in between. He had pale eyes and a short beard, and he wore a coat that had once been blue and was now the color of old fence wood. You heading to Seco Springs? The man asked. Could be, Caleb said. Name's Holt, the man said. He did not offer a hand. Ride that way most weeks, easier with company on the south trail. Caleb looked at the road ahead. He was not a man who trusted easily, but he was also not a man who refused help when his read of a situation told him the offer was genuine. Something about Holt's manner was flat and unperforming. He was not trying to be liked. "Caleb," he said, "I'll ride with you." They moved south without talking for a good mile. The land around them was open, and Caleb could see far enough in every direction to feel reasonably sure that no one was coming fast. The ridge shootings from the day before were still sitting in his chest, a small hard weight that he had put to the side but not put away. "You sheep or cattle?" Holt asked eventually. "Sheep." Holt made no comment on this, which Caleb appreciated. In this country, men who ran sheep were still regarded in some quarters the way rain is regarded during a funeral. Tolerated, but not welcome. "You know a woman named June Farrell?" Caleb asked. Holt was quiet for a moment. "I know of her," he said. "She sells remedies and makes candles, lives in the old stone house on the east end of Seco Springs." "Why?" "Business," Caleb said. Holt looked at him once, quickly, the way a man checks a sky that might be turning. "She's a private person," he said. "Old family. Doesn't trust strangers fast." "I don't need her to trust me fast," Caleb said. "I need her to listen." They rode on, as the afternoon came and pressed the heat down over everything, and the horses sweat, and the locusts made their dry noise in the brush, and the miles went by one at a time. Around the third hour, Holt pulled up short. Caleb stopped without asking why. Ahead, at a place where the trail narrowed through two rock walls that made a rough channel, 3 horses were standing riderless against the right-hand wall. The riders were not visible. The horses were tied, and they were not grazing, which meant they had not been there long enough to try. 3 men in those rocks, Holt said quietly. "I see it," Caleb said. "You expecting trouble?" "Yes." "Then we don't go through there." They turned off the trail and picked their way across open country, through brush that clawed at their boots and over ground that was loose enough to make noise. Caleb kept his hand near his sidearm, but did not draw it. They swung wide around the rock channel by nearly a quarter mile and came back to the trail on the south side of it. When they hit the trail again, Caleb looked back. Nothing moved in the rocks. Either the men had not seen them or they had decided not to follow. Neither option made him feel easy. "Somebody wants you not to reach Seco Springs," Holt said. It was not a question. "Somebody wants nobody to reach it ahead of them," Caleb said. They pushed the horses harder for the last 6 miles and came into Seco Springs as the sun touched the western hills and turned everything briefly and brilliantly gold. The town was small but alive. Horses at 2 hitching posts, lamplight starting in windows, the smell of a cook fire somewhere, and the sound of a dog barking 2 streets over. Holt took him down the main street and turned east, without being asked, and pointed to a low stone house at the end of a short lane. A candle burned in the single front window. "I'll leave you here," Holt said. "I don't get involved in land troubles." He paused. "Whatever this is, be straight with her. She doesn't have patience for anything less." He turned his horse and rode back without another word. Caleb sat for a moment looking at the stone house. The candle in the window made a steady, calm light. He dismounted, tied his horse to the post at the lane's end, and walked to the door. He knocked twice and waited. The door opened, and a woman stood in the light. She was perhaps 45, with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples and the kind of steady eyes that have seen enough hard things to stop being surprised by them. She held the door with one hand and said nothing. "My name is Caleb Horn," he said. "I work for Martha Larkin on the Larkin spread north of here. Mrs. Larkin sent me." There is a matter involving your family's land covenant. I believe your life may be in danger, and I need you to hear me out." June Farrell looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. Inside, the stone house was cool and clean. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf of small jars and bundles of dried herbs, the candle on the sill, and on the wall across from the door, an old wooden frame holding a photograph Caleb could not quite make out in the low light. He sat. She poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher and set one in front of him and sat across from him with her own. And she looked at him and waited. He told her everything. And the shootings, the deed, the covenant, Cole Drennan and his lawyers and his riders waiting in the rocks, the water rights. What it meant if Drennan got to her before Caleb did, and what it meant if she signed. He talked for 10 minutes without stopping. She listened without moving. When he finished, she looked down at her cup of water. "My grandfather's father made that covenant," she said. "He told my grandfather that the land had a voice, that you could hear it in the way sheep moved across it, the way the grass came back every spring, no matter how bad the summer before had been." She looked up. "He said cattle were fine animals. But that land kept in the old way, kept something alive that money could not buy back once it was gone." Caleb was quiet. "I will not sign anything Drennan puts in front of me," she said. I haven't signed it. I won't." "He may not give you the choice," Caleb said. "That's why I came tonight." June Farrell stood and walked to the shelf. She took down a small object wrapped in cloth and held it without unwrapping it. "How many men does Drennan have?" "Enough to put 2 shooters on a ridge and 3 more in a rock pass," Caleb said. She thought about this. "Then you can't take me back alone," she said. "No." "Holt," she said. "He brought you here. He said he doesn't get involved in land trouble." She almost smiled. "He says that every time. He always does anyway." She set the cloth-wrapped object back on the shelf. "Give me until morning. I know 2 other people in this town who will ride." Caleb looked at her. "You're not afraid?" he said. It was not something he meant to say out loud. "I'm afraid," she said, "and I'm choosing not to let it decide things." She sat back down across from him. "There's a place to sleep in the room at the back. Take it. We leave at first light." Outside, the wind had gone still. The candle flame stood straight and did not flicker. Caleb Horn took off his hat and set it on the table and sat in the quiet stone house and listened to the nothing that was also somehow everything. He thought about the ridge, about Martha on the porch, about Vernon Larkin's photograph on the wall and the old handwriting at the bottom of a faded deed. The land had a voice. He had been listening to it for 11 years without knowing what to call it. They left Seco Springs before the sky had decided what color to be. June rode a sturdy red roan that moved with the careful confidence of a horse that had been ridden in rough country and learned from it. Behind her came 2 riders she had recruited in the night. One was a man named Arlo, a former county surveyor who was now retired and who had shoulders like a draft horse and said almost nothing. The other was a woman named Clara Voss, the postmistress of Seco Springs, who rode like she had been born in the saddle and carried a rifle across her pommel with the ease of someone carrying a loaf of bread. Holt was already waiting at the north edge of town when they passed through. He fell in without explanation or acknowledgement that he had said he would not. 5 riders heading north on a morning that was still pale and cool. Caleb set a pace that was quick without being careless. He wanted to cover the open ground before the sun fully rose and lit everything up and took away whatever advantage early movement gave them. For the first hour, the land was empty, and the only sounds were hooves and birds, and the occasional dry whisper of wind through the creosote. Then Clara, riding to Caleb's left and a length back, said quietly, "Dust cloud, East Ridge, 3 horses." Caleb had already seen it. The cloud was moving parallel to them, tracking north at the same pace. Whoever was up there was not rushing and was not hiding. "They know we're here," Caleb said. "They knew the moment we left town," Holt said. "Drennan's got eyes in Seco Springs, same as everywhere." "How far to the Larkin land?" Clara asked. 22 miles, Caleb said. Arlo looked at the ridge, then at the trail ahead, then back at Caleb with a straightforward expression that contained a question. "No," Caleb said. "We don't split up. We stay tight and we move." They moved. The East Ridge was a long shelf of broken rock that rose 100 feet above the plain and ran almost perfectly parallel to the trail for about 8 miles before it curved west and dropped away. It was good high ground and bad country for the people on the trail below it. Caleb knew it. He had ridden this stretch before, coming south, and had noted it in the automatic way a man notes things that could kill him. The riders on the ridge stayed parallel. They were not gaining. They were waiting for the choke point. Caleb had not forgotten the rock channel from the day before, where 3 horses had stood riderless. That channel was a mile ahead, and it was the only natural pass through a low sandstone wall that ran across the trail, and going around it was possible, but would add 2 miles and cross country with no water. "They'll have the channel," Caleb said. "How many?" June asked. She was riding beside him now, watching the ridge. "Could be 3. Could be more if they brought riders up from the south overnight." "Do we go around?" "Around puts us in the open for 2 extra miles with the ridge in range." He looked at the terrain. "We go through, but we don't go in blind." He pulled up and they all stopped. "Arlo," Caleb said, "can you climb?" Arlo looked at the rock wall ahead and the ridge to the east and then back at Caleb. "Tell me where." "There's a draw that goes up the back of that wall about 300 yards west of the channel. If you can get above the channel, you can see what's in it. And if there are men up there. Then we know that before we ride in." Arlo handed his horse's reins to Clara, pulled his rifle from its scabbard, and walked west without ceremony. The other 4 sat their horses in the growing heat and watched the ridge. The cloud of dust up there had stopped. The riders had stopped. "They're waiting to see what we do," Holt said. "We're waiting to see what they do," June said. "Then we're all waiting," Clara said, with the flat practicality of a woman who had once been responsible for getting mail through to 17 homesteads in weather that did not care about schedules. 10 minutes passed. Caleb kept his eyes moving. The ridge, the channel, the flat land to the west, the sky, which was now full blue and beginning to press heat down onto everything. And then Arlo appeared on top of the rock wall above and east of the channel. He looked down into it. He held up 2 fingers. Then he moved his hand flat, patting it downward. "Stay quiet, stay put." 2 men in the channel. Caleb looked at Holt. Holt looked at Clara. Clara already had her rifle up and resting easy. Caleb thought about it for 4 seconds and then made a decision that had less to do with tactics and more to do with something he had been told once about how the best way to handle a fence dispute is to remove the fence. "We're going through," he said. "All 5 of us. Fast and straight. They have 2 men in that channel and 3 on the ridge. The men on the ridge can't shoot down into the channel without hitting their own people. The men in the channel are not expecting us to ride through hard. They're expecting us to turn around or wait." "And Arlo?" June asked. Arlo is going to let them know he's above them right before we go in, Caleb said. He looked up at Arlo on the wall and gave one slow nod. Arlo disappeared from the top of the wall. 2 seconds later, from inside the channel, they heard a voice say something sharp and alarmed. "Now," Caleb said. They rode, 5 horses at a full run, through a 40-foot wide channel of sandstone, with the walls pressing close on both sides and the sound of their own hooves so loud it blotted out everything else. Caleb went first. He saw the 2 men in the channel scrambling to their horses, looking up and back at where Arlo had been, and then ahead at 5 riders coming at them like a creek in flood. The men had guns. They did not use them, and when 2 men are watched from above and have 5 riders coming at them from the front and no time to think, they do what sensible men do in those circumstances. They moved aside. Not because they were cowards, because they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and Arlo was somewhere above with a rifle, and nobody knew quite where. Caleb rode through the channel without slowing. The others followed. He heard a shout behind him, and then nothing more. On the north side of the channel, the land opened out into the broad pan that led eventually back to Larkin territory. He did not stop. He held the pace until the channel was a quarter-mile behind them, and the ridge had bent away to the east and was no longer any kind of threat. Then he slowed. For they all slowed together, and the horses blew hard, and the dust settled, and the sky went on being wide and blue and indifferent above them. Arlo rejoined them 20 minutes later, coming down out of the rocks on foot and climbing back onto his horse with no particular drama. "They're not following," he said. "Why not?" Clara asked. "Because," Arlo said, settling his rifle back in its scabbard, "the man giving the orders is not in that channel. The man giving the orders is back at the anchor ranch, waiting to hear that the job is done. And now it is not done, and he has to decide what to do next." He said this in the manner of a man who had spent years watching land disputes play out in slow official processes and knew exactly how they went. June Farrell was looking ahead, north, toward land she had never seen. "Now, how much further?" she asked. 3 hours, Caleb said. She nodded once. A crow crossed the sky above them from west to east, its wings beating in that loose, unhurried way crows have when they know exactly where they are going. They rode north. Martha Larkin came off the porch before they reached the gate. She moved with the deliberate speed of a woman who has taught herself never to run toward trouble and never to walk away from it. She met them at the post and looked at June Farrell the way 2 people look at each other when they already understand more than they have said. "June Farrell," Martha said. "Martha Larkin," June said. They had never met. Something in the way they looked at each other suggested they had been expecting to for a long time. Pete came out of the barn at a jog and took the horses without being asked. And old Doug appeared in the barn doorway with a rifle in the crook of his arm and looked at the group and then looked south down the trail and then went back inside, which was as close to a welcome as Doug ever managed. Martha brought them all inside, and there was water and cold biscuits from the morning, and she laid the tin box on the table without ceremony and opened it and set the deed in front of June. June read it slowly, twice. Then she set it down and looked at the window. "This is what my family's name is on," she said. "It is?" Martha said. "Isaac Farrell was my grandfather's grandfather," June said. "He came to this country with nothing but sheep and a belief that the land had a purpose that cattle couldn't fill." She paused, as he was not a man who left things unfinished. Caleb stood near the door. Arlo sat at the end of the bench with his hat on his knee. Clara stood by the window, watching the trails south with a reflex that was by now purely habit. Holt leaned against the wall near the stove with his arms crossed and said nothing. "What does Drennan want you to sign?" Martha asked. "He sent a document 3 weeks ago," June said. "His lawyer had it delivered by hand. It releases the covenant restriction on converting the land use. In exchange, he offered $300. The room was quiet. $300, Clara said. Her tone was not outrage. It was simpler than that. It was just the naming of what it was. "He thought I needed the money badly enough," June said. "I might have. But I read what I was being asked to give away, and I knew my family's name had never been put on anything that didn't mean what it said." She looked at Martha. "I didn't sign." "I know," Martha said. "That's why he sent men to make sure you couldn't cause him any more problems." June turned her eyes to Caleb briefly, and there was something in that look that was not gratitude exactly, but was its close and quieter neighbor. Caleb looked at the table. "Drennan's going to move on this legally now," Holt said from the wall. "He's lost the fast option. He'll go through the county court. His lawyers have been building toward that for months." "How do we stop that?" Pete asked from the doorway. He had come back in from the horses and was listening with the focused attention of a 19-year-old who is learning which problems have solutions and which just have to be endured. "We don't stop it," Arlo said. "We answer it." He looked at Martha. "The deed is older than any of Drennan's legal claims. The covenant is written into the original title. If June files a declaration with the county recorder affirming the covenant is intact, and she has not signed anything releasing it, that document becomes part of the official record. Drennan's lawyers will have to argue against a standing legal covenant that predates most of the county itself." He said this the way a man explains something that seems complicated, but is actually just a matter of having read the right papers. Martha looked at June. "Would you do that?" she asked. "Ride to the county seat and file it yourself?" "I'll do it tomorrow," June said. She said it the way people say things they have already decided before being asked. Martha nodded once. Something in her face settled, the way a house settles in its foundation after a long period of uncertain weather. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening, and the light was going golden and soft over the pasture, where the sheep were moving in their slow, familiar way, back and forth across the grass. The sound of them a low, steady presence that had been part of this land since before anyone currently living had arrived to hear it. Clara came away from the window. "I'll need to be back in Seco Springs by the day after tomorrow," she said. "The Tuesday mail won't deliver itself." "I'll ride back with you," Arlo said. Holt said nothing about when he would leave. He was already making coffee on the stove, as if he had always been there. Pete went back to the sheep. Doug had already gone back to the barn. Martha sat across from June at the table, and they talked in low voices about the deed and the family, and the long thread that ran from Isaac Farrell's hand in 1858 to this table in this kitchen in this year. And Caleb moved to the doorway and stood in the evening air and looked out over the land. The grass was doing what it always did in the evening, catching the low light and holding it for a moment before letting it go. The sheep were pale shapes against the gold. The limestone bluffs to the east were purple and still. A single bird flew out of the mesquite line along the far fence and rose and turned and went north. Caleb Horn had been on this land for 11 years. He had watched it in every season and in every kind of weather, and had learned its moods the way you learn the moods of someone you have lived beside for a long time without knowing you were learning. He thought about Isaac Farrell, who had come to this country with sheep and a belief, who had put that belief into a deed, not because he thought it would hold forever, but because it was the only language he had for saying what mattered. The land had a voice. It did not speak in words. It spoke in the way the grass came back, and in the way the water ran, and in the way the flock moved at the end of a long day, easy and unhurried, toward the place they slept. He had been listening to it the whole time. Cole Drennan came himself on the fourth day. He did not come with riders. He came alone, on a tall bay horse. And he rode up the Larkin Lane in the early morning with his hat pulled low and his hands easy on the reins. He stopped at the gate and waited without calling out, which was the formal gesture in this country for a man who believes he still has standing. Caleb was already in the yard. He had seen the dust from a mile out. He walked to the gate and stood on his side of it without opening it. Drennan was perhaps 55, broad across the chest, with a face that had once been handsome and had turned into something else over the years. Not cruel, not soft, just very certain of itself in the way that long success and short patience produce. "Morning," Drennan said. "Morning," Caleb said. "Martha Larkin about?" "She is. I'd like to speak with her." "She'll come out when she's ready," Caleb said. Drennan looked at him steadily. The bay horse moved its head, and the bridle made a small sound. "You're her shepherd." "I work for Mrs. Larkin, yes." "You're the one who rode to Seco Springs?" "I did." Drennan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the pasture beyond the house, where the sheep were grazing in the early light, and the expression on his face was not anger. It was something older and harder to read. The expression of a man looking at a future he had already decided on, and discovering it has been quietly rearranged. "The Farrell woman filed with the county recorder yesterday morning," Drennan said. "I know," Caleb said. "My lawyers say the covenant will hold." "I expect they're right." Drennan took his hat off and turned it once in his hands and put it back on. "Your employer know I'm here?" "She does now," Martha Larkin said from the porch. She had come out at some point while they were talking, and she stood on the top step with her arms at her sides and looked at Cole Drennan with the level, tireless attention of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a conversation to end. Drennan turned his horse slightly to face her. "Martha," he said. "Cole," she said. A long pause. The sheep noise carried from the pasture, low and continuous, an older sound than any of them. "I need water rights through Widow's Run for my south herd," Drennan said. "That has not changed." "The Larkin water rights have not changed either," Martha said. "I'm not asking to take them. I'm asking to share the creek in dry months, a legal water sharing agreement. My cattle in the south section of the run, your sheep upstream, separate access hours." Caleb looked at Martha, and Martha looked at Drennan for a long moment. "Your men shot at my shepherd," she said. Drennan did not look away. "I told them to keep you from moving," he said. "I told them no one gets hurt. They went further than I said." He paused. "That won't happen again." "I'd like to believe that," Martha said. "I'm here alone," Drennan said. "No lawyers, no riders. I'm standing at your gate because I'd rather talk than litigate for 3 years and spend money we both need for other things." He turned his hat again. "I was wrong to go at it the way I did. I am telling you that directly." The wind moved through the yard. The leaves on the single cottonwood near the barn caught it and turned it into a brief whisper. Martha Larkin came down the porch steps and walked to the gate. As she stood across from Cole Drennan and looked at him with the steadiness that was her only inheritance from 40 years of difficult seasons. "Come inside," she said. "We'll talk." Drennan dismounted and tied his horse to the post and followed her toward the house. Caleb opened the gate and held it. Inside, June Farrell was still at the table. She had stayed, not at anyone's request, but at her own decision, and she had been going through the old papers in the tin box with the careful attention of a person who is reconnecting with something that has been waiting for her. She looked up when Drennan came in. He looked at her, and something shifted in his face. Not shame exactly, but the recognition of a person whose rights you had been trying to cut around, and who is now present and real and looking at you from across a kitchen table. "Miss Farrell," he said. "Mr. Drennan," she said. He sat. Martha sat. Holt, who was still there and seemed to have nowhere else to be, poured coffee for everyone without being asked. They talked for 2 hours, not about covenants and legal claims and water rights as abstractions, but about the actual land, the actual creek, the actual summers when the water ran low and everyone, cattle and sheep and the people who kept them, were under the same hard sky trying to get through it. June talked about what Isaac Farrell had understood about the land, the way it kept its promise if you kept yours. Drennan listened with the attention of a man who had come in expecting a fight and was finding something else instead. Martha pulled out a hand-drawn map of Widow's Run and laid it on the table. She traced the creek with her finger, north to south, and talked about where the Larkin sheep watered and where the run bent west and thinned, and where there was room, she thought, for a second access point further down. Arlo, who had also stayed, got up and looked at the map and said 2 precise and useful things about the creek's gradient and flow rate that settled 2 arguments before they began. By the time the sun was fully up and the coffee was gone, there was a handwritten outline on the table. Not a legal document, something rougher than that. A set of understandings between people who would need to share land and water for the foreseeable future. Understandings that Arlo said he could have formalized by a real lawyer within 2 weeks. It was not everything Martha had wanted. It was not nothing. Drennan stood and looked at June Farrell one more time before he left. "The covenant stays," he said. It was not a question. "The covenant stays," June said. "This land was kept in the old way for a reason. I won't be the one who ends that." Drennan put on his hat and walked out. Caleb walked him to his horse. At the gate, Drennan paused. He looked at Caleb the way one man sometimes looks at another when he has run up against something in that other man that he did not expect and cannot quite explain. 11 years on this spread," he said. "Yes," Caleb said. "Why a shepherd?" Drennan asked. It was a genuine question, stripped of the dismissal it might have carried earlier. Caleb thought about it. "Sheep don't argue," he said, "or they just need someone to pay attention." Drennan made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the neighborhood of one. He mounted and rode south down the lane, and the dust he made slowly spread out and thinned and was gone. Caleb stood at the gate for a while longer. Behind him the house was full of voices, and the smell of fresh coffee, and the sound of a map being studied and annotated. And in the pasture the sheep moved through the morning in their slow, sovereign way. And the grass held the light the way grass does, briefly and completely, before it lets it go and waits for the next time. The land was still here. The sheep were still on it. The old promise, written in faded ink by a man who had believed it mattered, had held. Caleb Horn put his hat back on and went to do his work.